Hello everyone, and welcome back to some more G-Senjou no Maou with me, Phantom's Y. So, last time we left off, we had the shocking revelation that Yuki had been working with Maou. We found out a little bit about the how and why of it. But yeah, we've still got plenty to see, right? So let's get right into it. Panting, Yuki and Misaha fled through the black darkness of the wharf. After that, the pursuers showed up. One of them called out to Yuki. He even managed to grab her arm before she shook him away and took off. She took 2 different taxis in an attempt to shake them, but it was to no avail. Taxis stop at red lights, but Yakuza don't follow the rules of the road. They follow their target to the ends of the earth. A nearly inhuman cacophony of angry snarls rushed in from the distance. It was only a matter of time before they were found. Yuki pulled Misaha by the hand and headed for a nearby warehouse. The heavy steel door was locked. However, Yuki had met with Maou once inside of this warehouse. The entrance had a keypad, and Yuki had memorized the password of Maou inputted. The warehouse's interior was dark and musty. Yuki pulled shut and locked the door before turning to face Misaha. Misaha's doubt was natural. Even in the face of Misaha's anxiety, though, Yuki untied a rope that bound a stack of crates. Misaha's eyes gorged in fear. Yuki pulled her dumbfounded sister towards her and tied Misaha's arms behind her back. Misaha's resistance to being bound amounted to no more than a quiet moan. Yuki pointed her cell phone's camera at her tied-up sister and pressed the button. Yuki almost wanted to say, "Think for yourself." Shouldn't Misaha know exactly what's about to go down by now? Yuki flatly declared her intention to kill Misaha's own father. The ecstasy and madness in Yuki's face reflected in her sister's eyes. Go die in the cold. Yuki remembered it clearly. In the cold, under the falling snow, they had been thrown out with no more than the clothes on their backs. Misaha may be trembling in fear now, but her pain is nothing compared to the freezing air and the uncertainty of that day. Yuki's stifled voice held plenty enough force to silence Misaha. They weren't very similar sisters. Their outward appearances were barely alike, but their personalities were completely opposite. Misaha's face was puffy and round, proof of her comfortable upbringing. She had a mushy way of putting her foot in her mouth every time she talked to the boy she liked. Her commonness finally grinded on Yuki's nerves. She gazed at Misaha's neck. Her younger sister had kept Yuki's ancient memento dearly these long years. Misaha was speechless. When she realized that her sister's eye bore no hesitation, there was nothing more to say. Yuki transmitted the photograph she had just taken. Let the second round begin, Haru. So, in this scenario, unlike, Shiratori's, Misaha's scenario, Yuki and Shiratori kind of sort of having a little more tension. Yeah! A winter wonderland, waiting just beyond an oak, and beach-lined promenade. This hill in the eastern district of Tomanbetsu City was Misaha and Yuki's favorite spot to play. And in Misaha's route, they visited there again. Not to be in this one, because Yuki's plan was stifled from the very beginning, when in Misaha's route, Kyosuke called the police. They'd spent 2 hours making a child-sized snowman. Misaha always copped a bratty attitude around her parents, but today, with Yuki, she wore a carefree smile. Yuki began with crossed arms. The cold, fluffy snow piled up on the sisters' shoulders. Snowflakes landed on the tips of their noses, or their toes rather, gradually melting into the warmth of their shoes. Perhaps not unlike the endlessly dancing white weather, Misaha's laughter refused to subside. This was an old, happy memory. They'd played with all their hearts until nightfall. They didn't want to go home. They didn't want to leave this sense of unity for their typically divided family. What awaited them was a strange household with 2 mothers. Yuki never bothered to consider how her parents and Misaha had come to live together until much later. Nevertheless, it seemed Yuki's mother was important to the Shiratori household. Even in her earliest memories, Yuki remembers her mother doling out orders as her father's personal assistant. That would be tough. Her sister's sweet voice made its way to Yuki's ears. It was an unforgettably serene sensation. She was an adorable little sister. The snowflakes caught in her eyelashes glittered like teardrops, framing her innocent smile. Misaha shuffled her feet about. her feet about, then gathered up the displaced snow in her hands. Misaha smiled mischievously as she packed a tiny snowball. You cannibal! Misaha was a sweet little girl. Her diligent preparation of a snowman's meal was no less dazzling to her cool, mature older sister. Misaha's tiny head nodded over and over. Yuki dearly loved her little puppy of a sister.
パパとママも
Yuki smirked at that. Yuki was still young and innocent. She had yet to understand the critical role of violence following in the shadows of words.
もちろんよ。さあ、ゆき太郎にご飯をあげましょう。うん。もう言葉は決まってるんだ。何？教えて。
Her little sister cheerfully answered.
水葉はいつでも姉さんの味方だよって。
Yuki couldn't help but crack a smile.
ちょっとちょっと。そんな言葉を雪だるまに食べさせないでよ。
Their laughter diffused into the winter sky. The sun gradually sank behind the horizon, dimming the earth, but the sisters' radiance was not so easily rested. Not the slightest hint of their coming parting was present in those dazzling winter days. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The men who had been chasing Tokita reported in, and she had apparently last been seen with Shiratori near the docks in the western district. The sounds of the night and the waves crashing against the wharf were interrupted by the ringing of my cell phone. At the harbor. Why do you think that? What was the picture? Now even her sister's gone and taken her hostage? Well, was there a caption or anything? And what if we don't? She'll kill Shiratori. Alright. In the meantime, we'll look for the warehouse Tokita's in and get a perimeter set up. What is Tokita planning? She's not really going to kill Shiratori, is she? Is she doing all of this to get back at the director? Dozens of rushing footsteps beat at the ground outside the warehouse. Light leaked out from the inside, so it was likely quite easy to locate Yuki and Misaha amongst the port's many storage buildings. A few short moments later, men were already kicking at the door and shouting. The warehouse's iron door held fast and strong. They were nothing but a gang of hoodlums. Unlike the police, they didn't have the tools necessary to force their way inside. She said as she shrugged her shoulders rebelliously. Misaha bit her lip after realizing her sister's intentions. Yuki idly looked down on her as she considered her options for the coming negotiation. It would be simple. Her opponents were a gaggle of amateurs. The director would be too worried about his precious reputation to call the police. Even considering Haru's raw logic, Yuki still had her nemesis bested soundly when it came to persuasive skill. The only problem would be her final bastion of innocence. Once Yuki commits a crime herself, she has turned down a dark path from which there is no return. Her father's golden record would be forever tarnished if his daughter became a criminal. It is for this reason that Yuki apologized to her father, Tokita Akihiro, in her heart. She desperately wished that she could at least have said a word of parting to him, but the march of time would permit no such thing. Misaha spoke directly to the hesitation in Yuki's heart. However, her pleading, sycophantic expression only reminded Yuki of her filthy biological father, and the hatred within her burned away the barriers that held her resolve in check. Around an hour later, Usami showed up with the director in tow. The sea breeze swept her long hair up and tousled it about. That one there, Usami. See the faint glow coming from the window?
間違いなさそうですが、どうやって入ったんでしょうか。
Usami's question was right on the mark, but I didn't have an answer yet.
一体今度は何だっていうのかね。
The director flared up at me despite his exhausted appearance.
真犯人はユキだって。あの娘の母親はうちの会社の金を横領したんだぞ。本来なら警察に突き出してやるところを追放するだけで許してやったんだ。
She should be thanking me, not holding some grudge, he says, with a sigh.
まったく、犯罪者の娘も犯罪者か。
Like he's in a position to say anything like that. The director was lucky we have such a strong wind this morning. The eyes peeking at him from behind Usami's long, windswept bangs bore all the horror of a Zai Gonzalez. I interrupted his whining. That's great, director. You didn't even get the police involved when you were the victim of embezzlement? That probably means that you'll want to keep this case under wraps too, right?
ああ、君だってそうだろう。
Oh, I couldn't agree more. If we keep the events of this awful night a secret, even Tokita might have a future. Not that Tokita's future is of any importance to me. It'd just be a waste of an able mind. I mean, if I build my connections with her now, she'll be of use to me in the future.
ユキに連絡します。
Yeah. Keep trying to convince yourself of that, Kyosuke. Yeah. Oh, use the device you used before so I can hear too. Usami quickly took out her phone and began to fit it with the widget. The phone rang.
遅かったわね、ハル。ユキ、そこにいるんだな。ええ。今度こそちゃんと倉庫の中にいるわ。小細工はなしよ、ハル。
The man himself spoke up in response.
おいユキ、貴様、一体自分が誰を相手にしているのか分かっているんだろうな。
愛人がいないと何もできない。解消なしの男でしょ。
Oh man.
なんだと。
Yuki imagined his red face, flushed with anger. As she provoked him, she listened to the ambient sounds in the background. The roaring sound of the sea breeze announced that he was indeed outside the warehouse. What do you want, Yuki? Oh, for some reason, thought that was Kyosuke.
ハル、立てこもり犯にいきなり要求を聞いてはいけないわ。まずは仲良くなってからって言いたいのか。そう。今の私はあなたの知らない人なのよ。バカを言うな。ユキはユキだろ。リザーもきっと悲しんでる。私もそうだ。未だに信じられない。
Yuki laughs at Haru's emotional voice. If she doesn't, the guilt will tear her apart.
まるでコントね、ハル。お前たちは完全に包囲されてる。ほら、田舎のお母さんも泣いているぞ。ユキ、少し黙ってよ、ハル。あまり感情をぶつけてくると、犯人が興奮して取り返しのつかないことになるわよ。
She looks at her bound sister with an icy glare.
私の要求を言うわ、ハル。
Yuki suddenly says,
今から1時間以内に来る。それだけじゃないんだろう。さすがにわかる？逃げるだけならわざわざ理事長を呼んだりしない。話が早くて助かるわ。理事長を車に乗せてどこに行こうって言うんだ。さあ、少なくとも理事長にとって楽しいドライブではなさそうね。
Yuki could hear Haru's breathing stop over the phone.
わかった。質問はない？これから先、車が届くまで一切の交渉は打ち切るわ。
Negotiators try to do what they can to get a reaction out of the criminal. After all, if the criminal is completely unresponsive, negotiations wouldn't have much of a leg to stand on. Yuki knows that, and plans to avoid all unnecessary contact with Haru.
待ってユキ、要求を飲まなかったらどうするつもりだ。あら、何のための人質だと思ってるの？
水葉は置物じゃないのよ。
嘘はよすんだ。ユキにそんな真似はできない。
勝手に決めつけてるのよ、ハル。
Yuki feigned composure, but the anger inside of her was erupting into a mighty tempest.
あなたが私の何を知っているっていうの？逆に聞くけど、ハルだって私に魔王のことは教えなかったじゃない？いい？誰にだって深い闇があるのよ。親にも友達にも相談できないようなストレスを抱えているの。あなただってそうでしょ？だから友達だからとかそういう甘ったるい考えはやめてもらえる？
Following that final provocation, Haru's voice changed entirely.
魔王のことは教えなかった。だと。
Yuki had finally let slip her connection to Maou. It was unimportant, though. Haru's connection to him, her absurd bloodlust, had been a case in Yuki's point. It was likely her deepest darkness, one of those secrets known only to herself.
私は魔王を知っているわ。ええ、宿を借りたことすらある仲よ。彼は歪んでいるけれど信念を持った男だわ。あなたと同じようにね。
The gauntlet had been thrown.
分かったよ、ユキ。
Haru said this as her tension noticeably doubled.
お前が魔王と関わっているのであれば、そして魔王を肯定するのであれば、私も容赦はしない。
怖いのね。
Despite her sarcasm, Yuki's smile twitched.
とにかく1時間以内よ。遅れたら勇者の大切な仲間が傷つくことになるから急いでね。
いいだろう。
Haru punctuated her response by hanging up on Yuki.
ええさ。
The younger sister was uneasy. Nevertheless, she merely looked up at Yuki as if she were worried for her sake. Haru had allowed her anger to show through her poker face. A display of tension during a negotiation can excite the criminal.
自分の心配をしたら、水葉。今の私の話を聞いていたでしょ？
Fear consumed Mizaha's eyes, and Yuki was satisfied. That woman has got to be kidding. I try to snap Usami out of the tramp she's been in since the call ended.
昔ユキはお母さんと二人でひっそり暮らしていた時のことを面白おかしく話してくれました。頼れる親戚もなく北陸の商村にある町工場で住み込みで働いていたそうです。お金がなくて着るものにも困るありさまでしたが、いつでもお母さんが助けてくれました。
Sounds familiar somehow.
ある時村にダムを誘致するしないで村中が賛成派と反対派に分かれ揉めたことがありました。ユキのお母さんは建設会社に勤めていた経験から工事の必要性を感じ賛成派に回ったそうです。しかし結果的にダムの建設は中止になりました。すると賛成に票を投じていた人たちはどうなったと思います？
Alright, I get it already. I'm no good with these kinds of stories. I shook my head, not wanting to hear anymore. I had a similar experience. Family standing is important in a small village. Tokita and her mother were ostracized, right?
ええ、ユキたち親子の住む家も火事で全焼したそうですよ。
Oh, come on. That's just way too far out there.
いいえ、ユキは放火だと言っていました。
Not that any legal ramifications could have addressed the root of the problem. Still, what if if what the director said is true, she had it coming to her. Everything was fine until she embezzled money from his company, right?
ユキの話では横領の事実はなかったそうです。それについてはとても信憑性のある話を聞きました。
You can't say for certain that she wasn't lying to you, or that she had her facts straight in the first place.
それでもユキに非はありません。
It doesn't matter whose fault it was, Usami. Good people have bad luck too. There's no point in holding grudges so long for every little thing. What are we arguing about? Let's just try to stick to the problem at hand.
はい。
We closed in on each other and talked in whispers. What do we know? Tokita demanded a car. She plans on taking the director hostage and running away somewhere. Her ultimate objective is likely to kill him.
まさしくその通りですね。
Then what's our best course of action? Prepare a car as demanded?
ひとまずは
Usami thought silently for a moment. Alright, I'll get on it. It shouldn't take anywhere near an hour. I arranged for a car to get here immediately. Yuki broke the silence as she twirled her hair in boredom.
結局京介君にはあのことは伝えられたの？
今そんなことはどうだっていいじゃない。
今が最後のチャンスになるかもしれないっていうのに。
Misaha stared straight into Yuki. It was an unshakably resolute stare, one that defied the gravity of her situation.
そのマフラー暖かいね。
Misaha nodded.
いつあげたのか覚えてる？
私が風邪をひいた時。
嬉しかった？
Misaha's idle stare transformed into a blissful expression. Her eyes narrowed as she reminisced on days gone by. She was weak to old times. Yuki suddenly posed a question to her sister, snapping her out of her trance.
どうして頼りの一つもくれなかったの？
それはだからどこに住んでるのかも知らなかったから。
探してくれてもよかったじゃない？
ごめんなさい。
私の母さんが肺炎で倒れた時マフラーのことを思い出したの。
Misaha interrupted her with a sob.
私にあげなければよかった。
Yuki sneered at Misaha as tears filled her eyes.
だってあなたは私を探さないで父親のもとでぬくぬくしていたんでしょ？
そんなつもりは。
今回だってそうじゃない。水葉は私の誘いを断った。あなたさえ協力してくれればもっと楽に理事長を脅迫できたのよ。
姉さんもうやめてよ。こんなの姉さんらしくないよ。
水葉こそ情に訴えるのはやめてよ。私はもうあなたと雪だるまを作ってた頃の私じゃないのよ。
Misaha looked down and desperately continued.
そんなに父さんが憎いの？
当たり前でしょ。
Yuki said as her eyes snapped open.
一時の感情に身を任せて復讐しているわけじゃないの。あいつに対する恨みと憎しみは時が経つにつれて消えるどころかどん。
でも姉さんたちが家を出ていったのは理由が。
横領の話？私の母さんがそんなことするはずないでしょ。それはあなたの父親の内部工作よ。
Maou had helped her investigate the circumstance surrounding her exile about 1 year ago. Come to think of it, it was likely at that moment, the moment that she sold herself to the devil, that the wheels of her revenge had begun to spin.
家を追い出された当時母さんが病気がちだったのを覚えてる？
Misaha didn't respond. She was likely too young to remember those days, but Yuki would never forget. She would never forget the blood on her mother's lips and hands as she coughed out her lungs. With a smiling face, she used to tell Yuki that everything was fine. How could that man throw a woman in that condition out into the cold?
そりゃ分かってるわよ。愛人だもの。いつかは切られる運命にあったんでしょうね。でも不倫にも筋ってものがあるでしょう。
Yuki knew complaining to Misaha about her mother's pain and humiliation wouldn't do any good, but she couldn't help herself.
あいつが母さんを殺したも同然なの。それは分かってよ、水葉。
何もこんなことしなくても。
Yuki gave up. Misaha may be your sister, but she's still an outsider. Oh. Sorry about that. Telephone. There we go. There's no way that she could understand. Even Yuki couldn't muster the empathy to consider other people's problems to be her own. Once upon a time, each of those countless convicts had told us her life story, but she'd listened as an unconcerned bystander. Yuki decided to respond leniently.
復讐が問題の解決にならないことは知っているよ。でもね、救いにはなるのよ。復讐こそが唯一の救いだと思い込んでしまったら、もう後には引けない。
As if to punctuate the end of her thought, the phone rang. Yuki quickly drew in a breath and exhaled before answering.
早かったわね、春。
望み通り車は用意した。
上出来ね。すぐ出られるようにエンジンはかけっぱなしにしておいてちょうだい。
本当に逃げられると思っているのか。
カーチェイスをするつもりはないわよ。絶対に追ってこないでね。追っ手の影でも見える。その場で海にでも突っ込むわよ。
正気じゃないな。
正気でこんなことができると思う。
たとえ私たちを振り切ったとしてもな。警察がユキを追うぞ。
でしょうね。今度こそ警察を頼らない理由がないわよ。
一生逃げるつもりか。今日捕まるか明日捕まるかって怯えながら毎日暮らすのか。
あらあら、容赦はしないとか言っておきながらまだ説得しようって言うの？甘いんじゃないの？
Haru had apparently ignored Yuki's provocation as she countered with a deadly blow.
ユキを追うのはユキのお父さんだぞ。
そんなはずないじゃない。
She answered coldly.
娘が罪を犯したら捜査から外されるわ。父さんもまた田舎に逆戻り。
よくわかってるじゃないか。もう一度言う。今ならまだことは公にはならない。まだやり直せる。今すぐそこから出てくるんだ。
同行したとして魔王の仲間である私はどうなるの？あなたは京介君のお仲間さんたちに暴行されるんじゃないの？
そんなことは。
Haru's faltering voice betrayed her hesitance. But even if Haru had a change of heart, the Sonoyama men outside would wring every last drop of blood from Yuki. They'd been chasing Maou for a good while now, too.
話はこれまでよ。次の要求を言うわ。
Yuki glimpsed at Miza. Her sister was already lost for words, dark with despair. I listened to Tokida's demands over the receiver.
そこの理事長に質問があるの。
なんだ、何が聞きたい？
重要なことよ。正直に答えてね。
She prefaced herself with that before continuing.
私と母さんが北陸の小さな村に住んでいた時、うちの家に火を放った男を知らないかしら。
何を言ってんのかわからん。
いいね。知っているはずよ。あれはあなたの指示。
知らんもんは知らん。
本当の目的は母さんが持っていたあなたの裏帳簿よね。おかげで何もかも燃えちゃったわ。よかったわね。
The director shook his head frantically, obviously in a panic.
あの時は村の人も私たちに冷たかったからろくに調べもなかったわ。家がなくなったおかげで母さんの病状も悪化した。この意味がわかるの？
It means whoever was responsible for that fire took years off Tokida's mother's life.
教えなさい。あなたの手のものだっていうのは分かっているのよ。
火を放てなどと命じてはいない。
Oh, man. That does mean that he gave an order, then I didn't tell him to set any fires.
盗みに入れって命じたんでしょ。でも見つからなくてめんどくさいから火をつけた。
こんなところかしら。
違う。あれはお前たちを心配して。そうだ。片倉君にはお前たち親子の近況を聞きに行けと。
Katakura. And if you remember, in Mizuha's route, Katakura was the man that she killed. The man in the, that was, killed in his car. It exploded. Ooh, okay.
あなたの会社の社員？何そう出世したんじゃない？
取締役の一人だ。それがどうした？
決まってるじゃない。片倉もここにやめなさい。共犯の中なんだから身近に置いているんでしょ。
バカを言うな。放火の証拠なんてないだろう。それに今何時だと思っているんだ。無関係な人間を巻き込むな。
無関係かどうかは私が決めるの。わからない。ここは私の法廷なの。
Her voice was cold enough to freeze one's blood. Sir, I think it would be best to comply with her demands for now.
しかし。
Look, if need be, I can get my father to erase certain things. You know what I mean? I just made up some bullshit, but it seemed to do the job just nicely.
いやもうええな。
He reluctantly agreed.
部下への連絡が終わったら中に入ってきてもらえる？
なぜだ？
嫌なの。
Tokida's voice was brimming with rage.
あなたが来れば水葉を解放してあげるわ。
Sweat trickled from the director's forehead.
実の娘の命がかかってるのよ。あなたみたいな鬼畜でもさすがに水葉は見捨てられないでしょ。
待て。私に何をする気だ？
それは来てのお楽しみよ。さあ、早くして。
He looked at me as if looking for help. Well, I don't have the right to force him into it. He blinks over and over, and his hand balls into a clumsy fist.
わかった。
待ってください。
Usami grabs the director's shoulder with a free hand.
危険すぎます。
しかし。
ハル、何のつもり？
At Yuki's prompting, Usami declares her thoughts with seemingly absolute confidence.
ユキ、お前に水葉を傷つけられるはずがない。これはつまり人質が人質としての意味をなさないということだ。
そう思ってるんだ。
だからこそ理事長をそちらに行かせるわけにはいかない。
I see. She can't kill Shiratori, but she can kill the director. If she had the director held hostage instead of her own sister, she could feasibly make outrageous demands.
なるほど。さすがはハルね。私の思惑をあっさりと見破ってくれる。でも誤解をしているようだからちょっと教えてあげるわ。
何？
The sound of flesh being harshly beaten jumped from the receiver, and perfectly coinciding with that, Shiratori's screams followed suit.
聞こえたかしら？
Tokida's cruelty manifested itself in Shiratori's gasps.
ユキ、
Usami's brows tensed, and after some time she began to speak.
今のは何だ？
本を殴ったの。ちょうど今倉庫の中で古びた釘を見つけたわ。次は
やめるんだ。
私の言うことをおとなしく聞いてくれればやめてあげる。
Someone nearby had had enough and jumped into the conversation.
わかった。今行くから娘を解放してくれ。
いいパパじゃない。その優しさを少しは私にも分けてほしかったものだわ。
I decided to speak up and mustered the calmest voice that I could. Hey Tokida, you're not lying when you say that you'll release Shiratori if we hand over the director, are you?
もちろんよ。信じて。
I'd love to. You just don't seem too trustworthy right now.
さすがは京介君ね。初めて会った時から
You mean like the way we think? Alright, look. I've had enough of this shit. Trump card time. Either Shiratori comes out, or we're coming in. Well, let's see. Got a couple of dozen men out here who could wrestle bulls, so I'm gonna say yes, I do. And I'll also say that if it comes to that, you're through, Tokita. Good one, Tokita. We'll see who's laughing when those guys drag you out of hiding. Actually, we already have a route into the warehouse. There's a window up on the side. It's about 5 yards off the ground, but that shouldn't be a problem if we can get a few men standing on each other's shoulders. Still, that should be a last resort. Sure, sounds great, honestly. We can hammer out the specifics once you come out of there.
ダメです。
Usami stopped the director a second time as he started towards the warehouse's entrance.
話してくれ。もう私が行くしかないんだ。
いけません。犯人はあなたを殺害するつもりなんですよ。
Usami finally called Tokita a criminal. It was likely a measure she took to kill her own personal feelings towards her friend.
そこの男は最低の類の人間なのよ。
たとえ最低の人間だとして見殺しにはできない。
Tokita gave him a short, nasally laugh.
あなたはだから友達が少ないのよ。そうやって正義風を吹き回しているとね、みんなうさんくさいと思うものなのよ。
とにかく人質の交換はしない。
そうやって強硬な姿勢を取り続けていると最悪の事態が待っているわよ。
ダメなものはダメだ。理事長、下がってください。
Usami managed to stare the director down as he took 2 steps back.
優秀なネゴシエーターね。
Tokita remarked sarcastically.
また連絡するわ。
Usami let her arm holding the phone slide down as a sigh escaped her lips. Are you sure we made the right call there, Usami?
理事長を人質に取られたら終わりです。
I realize that, but we can't just let Shiratori die.
ユキは水葉に危害を加えたりしません。
Why are you still acting so naive? She just hit Shiratori a few seconds ago.
いいえ、あれはハッタリです。
How can you say that? We heard the whole thing, didn't we?
よく考えてください。もしユキが本当に水葉の頬を平手でぶったのであれば、バチンという音と同時に水葉の悲鳴が上がるはずがありません。
She's right. If Shiratori had really been smacked, she'd have gone speechless from the shock.
おそらく水葉の目の前で自分の両手を叩いただけでしょう。
Which would mean
犯人にはまだ両親が残っているということです。
still, huh?
今のはユキのミスです。そんなハッタリをしてこなければ我々も二の足を踏むものを。
But as it played out, she practically told us that she won't be hurting Shiratori anytime soon.
先ほども言ったように、これはつまり人質が人質として機能していないということです。
Which means that we've got the edge.
ええ、
Usami nodded as she stared at the warehouse's wall.
あそこに窓がありますね。
Looks like things have taken a turn for the worse, Yuki thought. She paced around with Misaha with her arms folded. As Yuki had realized from the onset, her hostage was a weak excuse for one at best. She should have known Haru would realize this too. The fact that she'd been able to recognize Yuki's assault as a bluff only compounded the problem. She needed to force a hostage swap quickly, before things got any worse. Misaha, who who had kept silent until now, suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were utterly vacant.
さっきは驚かせてごめんね。
Yuki subconsciously allowed her guilt to squeeze out an apology. She may have been jealous, envious of her sister's comfortable upbringing, but she was not yet prepared to cross the line of violence against this innocent girl. Misaha muttered a quiet response before returning her gaze to the floor. Yuki was nervous about the upcoming raid. As long as they knew she wouldn't harm Misaha, they might force their way in at any time. They'll most likely try to enter via the warehouse window. If she puts up a fight at the bottom neck there, she might be able to drive away 1 or 2 men. But these opponents are muscle from head to toe. Each man she knocked down would stand right back up and try again. Haru hasn't wasted any time. A bulky black shadow stood menacingly still at the window. What do I do now? Yuki looked down at Misaha. Misaha returned her gaze.
あのね
She said in a sickeningly sweet voice. Yuki would have to cross that line. What's going on in there? I asked one of Gonzo's subordinates for a quick report. One of the smaller men had been given a boost up to the window and was peeking through.
よく見えませんね。窓ぶち壊しましょうか。
I casually looked over to Usami.
いいんですか？
Of course. Oh, I never told you, sorry. This warehouse is managed by the Azai Corporation.
それはすごい偶然ですね。
Now that I think about it, it is. Why did Tokita choose this place, anyway? Well, whatever, it doesn't matter. Alright, on 3. 1, 2...
ちょっとお待ちを。
What?
ユキからメールです。
A text message? Why didn't she just call you?
画像が添付されています。これは
Usami's expression grew severe. I reflexively peeked at Usami's cell phone. What the... Shiratori had been cut by a sharp object. A stream of blood trickled down her thigh. The wound looked shallow, but the meaning behind that fresh wound brought a shudder to my spine. Tokita, that fucking... She really did it. All that time at school must have made me go soft. Sisters? Give me a break. My heart froze up. Hey Usami, let's call off the raid for now. She was likely shocked speechless. She just stared wide open at her phone's LCD. The phone began to ring with a clamor. Usami's dumbfounded gaze stayed perfectly still as her hand pulled the phone to her ear.
画像見てくれた？
ああ、
私が本気だってこと分かってもらえたかしら？
Usami didn't answer, so I spoke up in her place. People will do anything when they're cornered, huh?
ひどく腐った気分だわ。生まれ変わるってこういうことなのか。
You're going to hell, Tokita.
あなたもでしょ。
I may have let my guard down too much around this woman. As my disappointment in Tokita peaked, the director called out to her from behind me.
事情は分かった。もう勘弁してくれ、ユキ。
Tokita's cruelty to the director wasn't abated in the least by his submissive behavior. She had no mercy, even for a man who had gone pale at seeing his daughter's bloodshed.
だったらとっとと来てもらえるかしら。
ああ、今行く。
片倉への連絡は済んだ。
先ほど済ませた。30分以内に来るそうだ。
Usami's arm didn't shoot out to stop him this time. She just watched the director's back as he trudged towards the warehouse.
おかしい。
Usami quietly muttered something. It was true when she said that she felt awful. Yuki cut the call and looked at the wound on Misa's thigh.
これでいいんだよ姉さん
Yuki struggled to say. A few moments earlier, the very moment that Yuki had seen the shadow at the window, Misaha suddenly moaned. Look, Nizan. Yuki's eyes shot open. Misaha had stood up by herself despite her hands being bound, and edged over to one of the many steel containers in the warehouse. Yuki nearly screamed out an attempt to stop her, but it was too late. Misaha raised her thigh to the sharp corner of the container and dropped herself onto it. The sharp steel corner mercilessly tore at her bare leg. Without even crying out in pain, Misaha turned to address her sister. "Will you trust me already?" Without even thinking, Yuki had snapped an image with her camera phone and sent it to Haru. She felt downright awful. Yuki untied the rope binding Misaha and inspected her wound.
大丈夫よ。もう血は止まっているみたい。
もう痛くないから安心して。
それにしてもなぜ？
Misaha shook her head.
姉さんに味方するって決めたの。
嘘をつかないで。今更遅すぎるわよ。
Despite her words, Yuki hated herself for not trusting in her sister.
私はあなたの父親を殺そうっていうのよ。それに加担するっていうの？
Misaha nodded, as if she'd given up on everything.
納得がいかないわ。
だって姉さんのすることだから。私姉さんのこと好きだから。
気持ち悪いこと言わないでよ。
考えたの。さっきからずっと。
何を？
今までの私怖がりで思ってることも口に出せなくて、子供っぽい私のこと、声をかけたい人ともまともに喋れなかった。
Misaha paused for a second and stared at Yuki.
姉さんが来るまで友達らしい友達もいなかったの。お父さんは警察に容疑をかけられて毎日肩身の狭い思いだった。姉さんが来て変わったわ。ここ数日は本当に楽しかったから。クラシックの鑑賞会、
そう。
あの後浅井君とご飯食べてたんだよ。彼 A 型だった。全部姉さんのおかげだよ。昔から姉さんといるといつでも楽しかった。
Misaha's direct, straightforward gaze became painful to Yuki.
雪だるまの名前覚えてる？
雪太郎でしょ。くだらない。
Misaha laughed feebly.
また一緒に作りたいなって思ったら決心がついたの。私姉さんと一緒に地獄に落ちる。
Yuki's chest threatened to rip apart. Such was the pain. She desperately looked over Misaha's whole body. Eyes, hands, feet, mouth. Not a part of her little sister told her that she was lying.
いいのよ。水田。
Yuki prudently scrutinized her again.
お父さんは世間で知られている以上に悪いことをたくさんしているの。姉さんたちだけじゃない。いつもうまいことやって切り抜けてきたみたいだけど、そろそろ報いを受けるべきなのよ。
Yuki could hear the infantile naivete in Misaha's words. She was in an emotional tizzy due to the extreme of the situation. Saying one is willing to engage in cold, premeditated murder based on a temporary emotion immediately raises a red flag. Most likely, Misaha is actually hoping for a situation where both the director and Yuki could be saved. It's impossible for her to hide her soft heart from Yuki's senses. Misaha started with a touch of loneliness.
私たちはこんなに違うの？
違う？
全然違うじゃない。見た目も雰囲気も話す言葉一つとっても違うわ。
そんなもの育った環境が違うからに決まってるじゃない。
して姉さんはそれを恨んでるんだ。
Yuki realized that Misaha's tone had been growing more firm.
なんとなく姉妹だから
血は半分しかつながってないのよ。
だから
今からそれすらも断ち切ろうとしているのよ。二人の唯一の共通点である父親を殺すのだから。
唯一
あなたが言ったことじゃない。私たちはまるで似ていないわ。私はおしゃべりが好き、あなたは寡黙。私は現実的で水葉は夢見がち。何か似ているところがある？
One mustn't forget to mention that Yuki is an illegitimate child, while Misaha was born into a proper family. There was a distinct gap there.
私人前だと姉さんの真似をして気ぐらいが高そうに振る舞っていた。
Yuki laughed involuntarily.
バカね。自分を偽ったってすぐにわかるわよ。
うん、バカだった。今度からしない。
今度があると思うの？親を殺しておいて未来があるとでも？
Yuki reprimanded Misaha harshly with her tone, and her sister fell silent. Misaha's fingers twitched faintly. She was getting cold feet. Yuki sighed and looked at her knees for a moment. As she suspected, this girl wouldn't be able to commit a crime. And Yuki would never be able to hurt her, the innocent child that she is.
もういいわ。私を助けようだなんて軽々しく言わないで。
そんな、私は本気だよ。
いいのよ。さっきのは嬉しかった。私が困っているのをただ見ていられなかったのね。
本気だってば姉さんの力になりたいんだって。
無理しなくていいの。私に嘘は通じないってよく。
At that moment, a loud rapping echo resounded from the warehouse door.
Oi, Yuki! ここを開けろ!
It was followed shortly by the voice of her mother's murderer. Director Shiratori shouted at the wall of the warehouse. He intends to become a hostage of his own volition. Are you sure you want to do this, sir? I talked briefly with him, and as I waited beside him, you might just be killed on the spot.
いやあ、どうしろというのかね。娘を傷物にされて黙っていろとでも?
You're a good father. Now that I've had a moment to look at him, I've realized he actually looks quite villainous. His sly, vulpine face was hideously warped. He's almost as tall as Gonzo, and no wonder being Tokida's father, but at the moment he looked withered and small. Tokida's voice came to us via Usami's cell phone.
今から扉を開けるわ。言っておくけど、下手な真似をしたら水葉の命はないわよ。聞いてるの、ハル。
もうやめよう、ユキ。
何を言い出すの？これからがいいところじゃない。
終わりにしようと言っているんだ。
何それ？
出てくるんだ。
話にならないわ。京介くん、聞こえてるんでしょ？
Yeah.
今、私は水葉の首に釘を突きつけている。
Yeah. If you open the door and we come charging in, you'll do her in.
じゃあ準備はいい？
I looked at the director. He nodded from in front of the door.
開けるわよ。
ちょっと待て、ユキ。
Usami butted in once again.
少し時間が欲しい。もうちょっと待ってくれないか。
どうして？
頼む。
自分の立場を考えてよね。あなたの頼みを聞く理由がないわ。
とにかく理事長はそちらには渡さない。
Usagi hung up on Tokita and stood in front of the warehouse door.
おい、君!
Move, Usami. I don't really care what happens anymore. I'm not Tokita or Shiratori's friend, and I'm definitely not a cop. Why do I have to go out on a limb for this? And why in the hell did I end up calling in Sonoyama men?
待ってください。まだユキが水葉を傷つけたという確証がないんです。
Hey, you saw the picture, didn't you? Why is Shiratori bleeding if Tokita didn't cut her?
わかりませんが、水葉がユキに協力したという可能性があります。
I realize that, but who on earth would go so far as to cut themselves?
ありえない話ではないです。
People like that only exist in fiction. You're grasping at straws so that you can keep trusting Tokita for some bizarre reason.
私が寒いのはこの際どうでもいいです。とにかくもう少し様子を見たいんです。
You heard her, sir. What do you think?
宇佐美君と言ったね。君はユキの友人だそうだが、一体何者なんだい？
私が何者であるかもこの際どうでもいいです。とにかく理事長、あなたが中に入ったら。
Usami's cell phone rings again. However, she showed no desire to answer it. Without Tokita's orders, the director wouldn't be able to enter the warehouse. Oh, for Christ's sake, just do whatever the hell you want. I jerked my chin at the director. It's not like waiting around for this Katakura guy will hurt anything.
ユキは今すぐ私が中に入ってくることを望んでいるんだぞ。
I shrugged and waved him away. Oh, come on, she's not going to kill her if you don't go in there right this instant. That would be utterly stupid, even if she tried. Worst case scenario, we break the window and rush in. It's not my problem that Shiratori's life is in danger. Still, Usami,
はい。
you may have pissed off our culprit, but am I right in assuming that it's part of some strategy? And now I'm getting the silent treatment. Alright, and actually, we're over an hour into this episode. Gosh, it sure did go fast, but that is where we're going to end it for today. So, hope you guys are enjoying, and as always, I will see you all next time.